So the book's called Race for Relevance, and there's of course, as all good books have, a sequel called Road to Relevance. So I'll send via SDA a summary of both books. Well, you may want to read them, but I found them particularly challenging, and turning the pages like getting a brick and whacking yourself in the head. The essence of the book is it says there is irreversible changes that membership-based organisations ignore at their peril, and those changes include, among other things, and see if any of these hit you as they did hit me, that essentially organisations that people are increasingly time poor, and yet our organisations rely on volunteers. So they're time poor, and yet we rely on volunteers. The other thing it talks about is value expectations. We're in an era now where many of us grew up where the thing you did was automatically join your society or your association or your professional organisation or your union. If our reliance on the future is the Y generation doing that, we're dead, is essentially its message. So brick number 2 in my head. So if we want to do it on philosophy, or it's the right thing to do, or it's what you do to contribute to your profession, God help us, or whoever help us. And therefore, as we realise this in organisations, we realise that in fact we were struggling to get the value proposition to people who could go on the internet and expect it for free. And we did focus groups recently. You didn't want razor blades near you after you read them. The people think, we'll just get that for free and we don't need to contribute, and I like that idea, but you want me to pay. It's getting harder and harder, and so what did we do in organisations? We added services. We tried to add value by adding things, and what the book says is actually there's no value in services that aren't used. So by adding things that are just peripheral, whereas actually potentially taking, even though we all said, oh, it won't take much energy and it won't be much of a distraction. In fact, it is a distraction, and it takes time and some energy and opportunity cost. And it's better to go deep and really understand what members need, and really understand that and go deep rather than wide. All in your spare time with your volunteers who have no time, and with your limited resources. The other thing it talked about was the fact that that there was much consolidation specialisation, and this is good for many of your organisations, I think, that broad organisations like the AMA, Australian Medical Association, actually only have about 30 or 40% density to our surprise. But the specialist organisations within the fields have a lot higher membership. So increasingly, I was at a dinner party the other night, a lawyer was off to a conference on the weekend. I said, oh, you're going to a Law Society conference? He said, oh, I don't know who's putting it on, but I'm going to a conference with other family lawyers because I'm a family lawyer. So I think the specialisation is important. However, the specialisation has a problem of scale. Do you have enough organisational scale to be able to do the things that are needed whilst keeping the specialisation? So there are growing models developing about saying the operational side doesn't need to be specialised. It is utter madness, some would argue, that we try and operate with less than 1,000 members and do our own membership processing and have our own databases, etc., and that we should have a common services model for that and allow us, with our limited time, to focus on the policy issues and the issues that are important for the profession or the area. There is a question of what is the lowest possible scale you can have and still be able to function effectively. But that's not necessarily about amalgamations, that's about new models of back-end amalgamations of the stuff that, the website, the membership processing, the database, the accounts, the stuff that really isn't the best use of the limited time of a committee, and let them focus on taking the profession or the area further in the policy and other senses. The other thing it talks about is that increasingly there is competition in these areas. So where we used to be the only area someone joined, increasingly people are... Have you got that in any of your areas where people could join other organisations? That competition is likely to grow, and of course there's now competition by people. We used to be the source of all IP or knowledge for the area. Now there's umpteen journals come up and other things, and there's increasing competition in the field, and people are trying to grab territory. Generational differences I've mentioned, and technology. It essentially says that we have been disastrous on the use of technology, and in most professional associations we wait for the lowest common denominator to, the slowest ship in the convoy model, until everyone had email. We didn't use email, and we still like to do the paper journal. Of course 5% of our members like the paper journal, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's saying that that's just utter madness if we are going to handle the future, that we just have to face up to the fundamental change that digital technology is bringing. And the hard part of that, it means doing things differently and changing. So the rest of the book then goes into, often books like that are good on analysing the problem rather than the solution. The rest of the book goes into its solutions, and it says, will this decide to work yet? No. It says that among other things, to try and address this without a governance model that actually allows you to make the changes. That essentially it says we're not regarded in associations as dynamic. It tries to be polite, but it's not very polite. That the yeah butters in our organisations usually win the day, and because it's been done that way for 50 years, we better do it for another 50. And it says the only hope you've got of making that change, there it is, thank you sir, well done. The only hope you've got of making that change is with a governance model and structure that allows decisions to be made. And how big are some of your boards? Do you have boards or committees? Who's got more than 10 on their committee? Okay, who's got more than 20? Who's got less than 10 of the others? Okay. Well, it's saying in some groups where it's more than 7 or 8, can a decision really be made? And in the end, you then have an executive that really makes the decision. So why don't we face up honestly to that you need a small-sized decision-making body. If you have a big group, you end up having a small group. So why not be honest about that, is what the book goes to. Now, in our organisation, we faced up to it very hard. We've got a National Assembly which has got 50, 60 people there. It then elects a board of 6 or 7 people. Now in many organisations they're now saying maybe that board should have some independence on it or some people with some commercial nous in bigger organisations, but at least we've got a 7 people board that ultimately their decisions can be overturned by the National Assembly, but they do the day-to-day decision making. Not day-to-day, that's my job, but they do the oversight of that. The other thing, the next stage is irrelevant for this group if you don't have the staff. Rigorously define the member market. It is often changing. Is there a member market for? Is there a biotech member market now, or are they still microbiologists and blah 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 blah? Years ago, there was a thing called IT. There wasn't a thing called an IT industry. It was a whole lot of different groups within it that over time evolved. So keeping an eye on the evolution of this thing, particularly in the private sector, the book suggests we really define rigorously the member market. Rationalise the programs and services, make sure they're really desirable and beneficial to members. I can talk to you about what we've done, but I'm interested in getting a bit of exchange. And then have the robust technology. So the book goes on with that, and there's a second book that goes into a lot of more detail. If it interests you, I'm more than happy to just shoot around the summary of those 2 books. But rather than go on with the presentation, what I thought would be interesting is just to get some questions from the room for a group to... not questions to me, but what are the questions in your head about dealing with membership. Most organisations prefer to just have that little report and it's going down 5 or 10% a year, and we try and ignore it, you know. And it reminds me of that wonderful episode where the hospital worked better without the patients. So if membership is fundamental to organisations, not just for revenue, but also if part of our role is to progress our goals of our members, we need an adequate voice and adequate capacity to do that, leaving aside back-end efficiencies that might be achieved. What do you think are the key issues in your mind about trying to address the issue of growing membership and your organisation working well?
What do you offer outside of your annual scientific meeting?
Or someone else driving?
I've got the worst writing in the world. But
Well, does anyone want to volunteer with good writing? It's just I'm not allowed to leave here, so... So what are the things you offer beyond the conference? Great question. What other questions?
Addressing the different needs and expectations of different cohorts, students, academics, industry.
So even within our small show, we've actually got different cohorts, a la students, academics, people in the private sector, dare we mention? Retirees. Any other cohorts?
Or your mid-career, early career?
Mid-career, early career. So,
General public.
and in terms of how do we connect with them, that's probably another question. You have general public members. Ah, interesting. So we've got this tiny show, but within this tiny show we've got segmentation. So we're already stretched, and now we've got to do something different. And of course, young students or young professionals, you know, is often a classic group. A lot of people spend a lot of agony over. Other questions?
I guess it's related, but what to do with postgraduate students that depart the field, but you want to retain their membership.
What do you do with postgrads? Where do they usually end up?
Not in your labs.
No. So our strength might be in our core areas linked to unis or research areas, when in fact our potential members might have gone beyond that into private sector or elsewhere. And so we're perceived, or we've got some strengths in areas where they're a captive audience, but that's not the breadth of our potential. Great question. Other questions?
Another group might be lapsed members. What about members who used to belong but now forgot to pay their dues and no longer belong?
Yep.
How do we get them back?
Yep.
I think one of the opportunities is how do you turn your membership into your ambassadors?
Fabulous.
So instead of having the dilemma of how to drive membership vested in one or two key people on a council or a board, how do you empower those really enthusiastic members, and you only need a small percentage of them, to go out and be your ambassadors, and therefore you sort of spread the word in, I think, a much more relevant way. Because I think people often can't relate to the people that sit at the very top. You know, if it's sort of a largish membership base and it's geographically diverse. I mean, who is this president? I know nothing about him. Who is this secretary? Who is this? Whereas if you've got some key sort of ambassadors at the grassroots, that they're actually, I think, the key to driving and sustaining your membership, because they also collect information that perhaps the council isn't getting.
Terrific. And then we could add to that, what for them to play that role, what would be needed? What support, what resources, what encouragement would be needed for that to happen? And I think that raises the other question about, are our arcane sort of traditional structures the right way to network members in the future? If I throw another question in there. Where does social media fit in versus the traditional president, secretary, da-da-da-da-da? So I'll throw that question up if I can from the...
Can I broaden that?
Yeah.
How do you communicate with the extraordinary range of members that we all have, accepting that if you're old like me, a press release or a newsletter might just do the job, but if you're virtually any younger than I am, you have to be putting it on Facebook or tweeting it or sending an Instagram in relation to it or...
So the social media question, I think, is a huge one. and we're trying to answer these in the real world with most of you not having any staff. What else?
Well, it's been brought up earlier, but the simple mechanics of how do you remind people to pay, how do you make it easy for them to pay, how do you make it so that they will pay at the time they get the reminder, and it's not a matter of having to remember when they go home or something.
Fabulous question, and I won't answer these as we go, except this one I'll just throw in to get your head thinking. We, for example, go to the unis and sign people up. Sorry. We go to the unis and sign people up. Now, we used to sign them up, give them free membership, and then we'd spend another process converting them to membership. So we got them as students and then tried to convert them to graduate members at a lower rate. What do we do now? We go and sign them up for $5 a quarter. I'd be happy if it was $1 a quarter, except my admin team had chased me down the hall. But $1 a quarter, because all I want is their bank and credit card details, because in the fine print we say, when you are due to be in the workforce, you will automatically become a grad. We then ring them all, talk to them. If you've got a job, great. You know, you're aware of this, we can check your contract, we can da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, you know about this, this and this. These things are coming up. And then on the 1st of March, they become graduate members. So instead of converting at about 10%, we're now converting at about 80%. So there's just one example. And of course, when I arrived, most of our members were on annual payers. We now are down, in 4 years, we're down to under 30% are annual payers. Because the annual payers, that's a chance every year to decide whether I pay or not with all my other bills. Whereas if it's periodic payment, they don't think about it. And it's automatic, and they have to take an action to do so. That's what the banks rely on. It's just too painful to change. Now, of course, that's not enough. That'll catch up with you eventually. But it also means if they change workplaces, you still can maintain them as members. Because, well, that's if you ever do... Any of you do payroll deductions or PAYE? No, you're all annual payers or... So there's basics like that. Can they even join online? You know, we're now up to something like 60% are joining online. Now, unless we have that facility and it automatically goes through the payment system, etc. Again, these are things, small organisations, why would we all separately develop those capacities? It's madness, really. These are things that can easily be done in combination very, very cheaply and efficiently. I said I wasn't going to answer every question. Other questions in your head?
Before we move to another one, can I add something to that?
Yeah.
Many of the people who pay their SCA account pay it by cheque, and in many cases, because your presidents of all your associations change over every year or every couple of years, in many cases it's a different person signing that cheque every time. In most cases it isn't reluctance to pay, it's just the person's never paid it before, they're not quite sure what it's for, it got lost in the pile.
Yeah.
So I think that the comments about somehow streamlining and somehow simplifying those processes, and frankly making it a... Does everyone else in this room pay their bills by some sort of automatic process? I certainly do.
At home, yeah.
And just, everyone does it at home.
So why are we using cheques?
For heaven's sake, who's got a chequebook?
So that's another great example, and particularly small. It's a vicious circle. The smaller the organisation, the more labour intensive the activities, because we don't have the investment in the efficiency.
There's a reason why people use cheques. Associations often require 2 signatures on every, it's illegal, on every payment.
Yeah, you can do that online.
with-
You can do that online.
Unless,
Only if you're in the
no,
same room.
not necessarily. Unless you have a business account, and for years I went to the Commonwealth Bank and said we have this problem. Our committee, there's not 2 committee members in any city. They're all over Australia and in New Zealand. How do we get 2 signatures on a cheque? We need some electronic way that we can sign for payments. And until one day I met someone different and said, you need a business account. Whereas, all the years of our history, we hadn't had a business account, we had something else, whatever it was, a private account or something.
So,
and until you move to that business account, you can't get that electronic.
Yep, all of our committee said we couldn't move to cheques because you need 2 signatories. As you said, with the right account, there's ways to do it, and we could have that shared around with each other. You can even have an authorisation system short of a cheque, a signature, that authorises someone to make the electronic payment.
We use Commonwealth Bank business transaction account, and it has a token. So I never ever in contact or face to face with the treasurer.
Yeah.
I put everything in, and the treasurer
Puts their
authorises
code
itself.
in, and then you got the
It's
two
just a
things.
little token. I think it's $5 a month.
Yeah, but as I said,
You need the right account. And why would you in a small committee have to think about all this? I mean, this is the problem, or the challenge, that it's really absurd to think that everyone would have to find and reinvent the wheel. Well, eventually will, but how much do we all have to learn and deal with the Commonwealth Bank instead of your peak body having a capacity or some way, some way that this. To me, the part of being in a peak body is that, we don't reinvent the wheel. And that's the purpose of today, among other things. But it's then having the peak body having the resources to be able to save you the resources, da-da-da-da-da-da. So it's not about just adding to the backpack of the peak body, it's how does the peak body have the wherewithal, or how does one of the bigger groups among you, or a couple of the bigger groups, work this out so that there's a service arrangement. But it's just an option. I'm just, it's only an option.
It's just with the membership, we have actually quite a good retention rate.
Yes.
The big problem is the technology that we use. It causes problems with people actually signing up. So we have a system that you need to log into and have a password, and people only ever access the system once a year. They never remember their passwords or their email or the login. I've tried to get around this and I can't. We're going to have to change systems, but they invested before I arrived a lot of money in the system. And the first year I was there, I think I got 40% of people ringing me to say I can't log in and I can't get my password, and I would have to actually reset the password. So it actually created so much more work than, and I still have the issue.
It really annoys me how many charlatans are out there who rip us off. We do finally invest, and we don't have the time or energy to do the due diligence, so we all make the mistake and get someone who sells us something that's, and it is a fast-moving world. It might have been cutting edge at its time, but of course we all know that these things are now easily doable, but you're stuck with legacy stuff. So, dare I say, you have an open source model among the society members where that's got all these fundamental features on it, and then you effectively control with a simple CMS a system that enables you to put your own content on. But it's not a new thought. But why hasn't it been progressed? Because in part the very inert structures, the very difficult honorary structures to get any decisions through, mean that anyone who's got the idea just has to factor in agonising meetings with every little group that take 6 months to make a decision and find all the yeah buts. So sensible decisions aren't progressed because it's just too hard. The money is the money goes from the initiative into all the work to get people on board. And so sometimes it's easier to get a few like-mindeds together, crack the egg, show it works and it's a benefit, and then roll it on to others. It's just too hard to get to wait for the slowest ship in the convoy.
So I just want to make a comment there about e-commerce. Our experience with e-commerce and trying to get our members to pay online and have a shopping cart facility on the website was really challenging for us because we banked with the Commonwealth Bank for 50 years. We had hundreds of thousands of dollars in an account with the Commonwealth Bank for 50 years. Well, not quite that long, but a long time. We went to the Commonwealth Bank to get an e-commerce account to let us do that, and they refused unless we would give them a deposit, the value of our annual turnover as a deposit, in case for some reason we didn't produce our journal that year and all our members complained and they had to pay back the dues, even though we produced a journal for 50 years every year.
So how did you get around it in the end?
Oh, well, we went with another company that's got that facility built.
They can be absolute they're dreadful characters. I mean, I know everyone would be shocked to know a bank could be in, a pain. One of the things we found with the Commonwealth Bank is a little concept of collective bargaining, where they didn't give us stuff about your little individual show, but combined, and we did it with unions, they had a hell of a lot of money sitting in their bank and got a lot of benefit and got a lot of transaction fees. And over time we cracked down. I mean, you might recall being able to pay by a credit card that you had to see the signature and da-da-da, and at what point we were able to pay over the phone. It was interesting, wasn't it? It just suddenly happened. So they tried that same caper on with a number of organisations I was involved in, and it slowly changed, but it's very frustrating, and a bit of collective bargaining can help. I'm conscious not to get lost in the E and get back to some of these other issues before time. Can I comment briefly, and sorry for moving away, but I'll grab that. I know this will sound very obvious, and many of you have done it, and there's all sorts of wanky processes, but actually clarifying the reason for being and testing that with members and having members own it is, I think, a really useful process. It's how the value proposition jumps out. It's how you start defining what we do other than a conference and why we exist. All the books you'll read will say why generate, why, we need utility, they need specific outcomes and benefits and what's in it for me. And I know all those arguments. But people also want to be part of something, that they achieve other things like an identity, like being part of an organisation that articulates their concerns and what they care about. And so the closer you can get to why we exist, and that's often a hard question. And if the answer is there's no clear answer, well, maybe that is an answer. But if there is a clear answer, it's a good process. And that's where when I arrived at APESMA now 5 years ago, that's the first question I asked. And then I got our elected body to jump on the phones during a meeting instead of sitting there pontificating. I actually got them on the phones during the meeting. Now, there were little piles of water on the floor in various spots because they actually had to talk to some members. But it was a very cathartic experience. Actually, we scripted it, obviously, but actually ran and asked members, why are you a member? What's important? Tested the concepts with them. Here's our reason for it. Here's why we exist. Does that reflect what you want? From that, you can obviously start defining what, then you need to obviously align your offering or your value proposition to that. But that should be aligned, and anything the organisation should be aligned back to that. It allows you to have a hope of saying, why are we doing this, and what are we doing something else. In terms of that, the segmentation under that, there may be some segmentation of that. If we get this right, we need to make sure that segmentation is still linked back to the reason for being. That, we have to be honest about how many different trails we can go down as a small organisation and ask ourselves, is it really, is this young professionals or students group sounds great in principle, it might be the answer, or is it actually a bit of money going for people who want to piss up every so often? And if that's part of the answer, fine, but let's be honest about it and make sure it is reflective and connects with the organisation and where it's going. What it might find is, in fact, that they want more of a voice or more advocacy. It might find that they want more focus on the workplace and their world and their lives and what's going on. It might find that they want baubles. We run Member Advantage, for example. It aggregates 600,000 member groups and gives you baubles on top of your fees. They might want that, but you test it with them. They might want stuff around career and supporting them in their career. And then once you find that, you can go deeper. So dare I say to you lot the value of research. But this sort of research, this sort of, very practical research, you can't do enough of. and it doesn't require money, you know. Survey Monkey, a little focus group. What's the difference between a focus group and a meeting with a group of members? My joke is, in one you listen. You know, you actually interact, you know, and then test, here's the idea we're thinking of going with, what do you think about it? Because it not only gets you listening, it has another purpose. It's the purpose of the member going, or the non-member going, from uninvolved to more involved, to more ownership of their organisation. And I think, although you need to be looking for utility to meet members' need, at the end of the day, why does someone join? They have a need, issue or concern, and the organisation demonstrates how it satisfies that need, issue or concern at its simplest level. But that's not just a utility. It also could be about a sense of belonging. It might find, what do most professional associations do? What's their recipe? Let's go through the standard recipe, because there's one element of this recipe I haven't seen many members of SDA use. And it may not be useful, but just, let's go. By the way, I deal with a lot of these shows and most of them are useless. Like, they are really pretty moribund shows, and yet they still have people flock to them. Why? Why does, closed doors, why does Engineers Australia have 90,000 members? Some of you might know people in engineers, so I'm really taking a risk here. But why? I mean, they're pretty useless. So what do they offer? Conferences? Yes. You all, you know, there's some conferences. So there's the learned society element, yeah? So they do the journal, or they get the different subgroups together to sit and talk about suspension bridges and practical stuff. You can't go wrong. They do that. What else does the standard professional association do?
It doesn't cash things, get discount on this or
Bit of discount. Some have got into that, but
Professional accreditation is a very
accreditation. So they do a code of ethics, and they do some form of accreditation. How do I differentiate this group from this? How does it? Why am I an engineer and this person over here who says they're an engineer and does my car, an automotive engineer, is actually a car mechanic? How do I differentiate myself? So that a lot of what they do is people who flock there for identity. Now you ask yourself, is any of this relevant for you? It may not be. I'm just going through the standard recipe. How do they then tell? Is it a secret handshake? How do they differentiate that person in Engineers Australia from someone else? Post-nominals. Post-nominals. What's the scientist post-nominal? PhD, you know, most of you use, and things like that. Most professional associations use post-nominals. Do any of you?
Yeah. We've just instigated a fellow.
And we'll find a non-sexist term for fellow eventually. No, I know what you mean, yeah. And you're a fellow too.
I'm actually 3.
Okay, so some identity thing is also part of the career progression, part of my separate identifying. Again, ask yourself. We certainly had lots of debates with SDA about the concept of a certified practicing scientist. So yes, you're great at science, but scientists now actually have to, you know, understand IP, grants, run labs, da-da-da. Is there warrant something where you start differentiating? Now these are money go-rounds for organisations, right? Because there's then, what else do they do? CPD. It's continuing professional development. It's a money go-round. You can't keep your little letters unless you do X. Oh, how do you do X? You come to our conference, buy our journal, do our webinar, and of course bigger groups are now going on with digital technology to deliver a lot of the CPD. And then they might have baubles. But that's the basic model for years that's led to people flock. Now they're increasingly struggling with the Y generation, but if you ask yourself which bits there might be an option for your organisations, and that would only be found by testing it with members. Do they want identity? Do they want career? Do they want code of ethics? Do they want work? Increasingly these associations are struggling because they're not including workplace advice and support in the offer. And the stuff where this gets a problem is in the workplace and they want support. So is there a joint membership option for organisations to connect the professional with the technical society, with the society with the workplace? Do we need to face up that the only way we're going to progress in the future is with some combined? Organisation remains independent, but what about a model of a joint membership? So a back end that, I know this is radical, right? I'm not suggesting this is other than radical. But what about a back end efficient organisation where we don't pretend we're an IT company or a membership processing or finance organisation? That gets done efficiently. And we start saying we want our identity of our own organisation, but it's not meeting all members' needs. They're increasingly only going to join one organisation. They're not going to join multiple in the future. It's going to be hard enough to get them to join one. So do we need separate independent organisation but a joint membership option that's just progressed through a contract service arrangement sitting behind it? These are the sort of radical ideas that I think, frankly, I think we're in deep trouble if we don't address. Deep, deep trouble. In terms of then I've got to wrap up, but in terms of the members then playing a role, when I came in, I think we had fallen in the trap of just becoming service organisations. And the debate I took through the union movement and through other organisations is unless members realise we will only achieve these things through their active engagement and involvement in their organisation, and we're honest to them about that, then we're not only presenting a fraud to them, but we're also missing the opportunity for them to really own it. But how they own it in modern times without having to become the president sitting on an arcane committee that they hate is the challenge. Now, in pharmacy at the moment, I could bore you for hours, but at the moment we've got a Facebook page that's just clocked over 4,400 people in pharmacy. That's within 2 months. Now, it was extraordinary. Now, the buggers mightn't pay us. That's our next challenge, of converting them to members. But boy, oh boy, compared to leather footwork, to get to that point. Now, we're also visited about 400 odd pharmacies as well. You know, it's about layering this stuff. But buying Facebook advertising's been interesting as well in building that. Very cheap. So we certainly, the trouble is that it's not just someone who can set up a Facebook page, it's then someone who's got the nous of how you actually work it. It's online campaigner, it's an online organiser. It's not someone who knows Facebook, it's someone who can then engage the community, you know, get the mems to look good, engage them, have interaction, etc., etc. So we've been trialling it, and it's certainly got a lot of potential. And those people are becoming the ambassadors because they're able, of course, to forward stuff on and da-da-da-da-da. We're then trying to get that offline into physical meetings, and we've now had meetings. We had a meeting in Sydney the other night on a Friday night with 50 attended. And they're not attending because they're interested. We're hitting the buttons on the issues. We're trying to be relevant to them. After 5 years training, getting about $25 an hour focuses their mind. Certainly there's a lot of examples we can share. I can send some of the recruiter friend of the ambassador stuff. You'll probably have some of you tried those programs? I think the thing that's often missing with them is the why. Every time we ask someone to do a task, we need to cover the why. Why are you being asked to do this? Oh, as a favour to me. Oh, no. You're not doing us a favour to be involved. We've got to change this attitude in organisations that someone's doing us a favour to join or participate or come to a conference. Thanks for coming to. No. You're doing this for this. This is a way we achieve something. I know that sounds a bit. It sounds only a small change, but it's not an insignificant one if we start going back to our reason to being and link the things. There's a whole lot of ways you can do that. I mean, we've actually tried incentives, financial incentives, which I must say I was horrified by when I saw, but it's interesting the way this new generation thinks. It's worked for us. I don't saying it'll work for you. But more importantly, some form of recognition for those that are doing it. We're now trialling gaming style sites, you know, like a Nation Builder, etc., where you know, someone who does more than so many career events or signs so many up goes on the ladder board on the other side. I mean, to me, this is horrifying, but that's how the young generation thinks and functions. And the challenge for many organisations is how you do some of these novel, mad things if you're actually dominated by a group that are there because they'll always be there and they've been amazing contributors to the organisation. But they join because they have a very different headset to this other generation. So I can forward you, there's plenty of models of that sort of thing, and it's a great, it certainly doesn't hurt, and it can really help the organisation. I've mentioned social media. We've talked about payment. I don't pretend I've covered this comprehensively, but I hope I've commented on most of the topics up there. So in short, get the reason for being right, then align the offerings to that reason of being, and then make it actually easy. We need a modern, efficient organisation in order to do that, so that you can focus on the important things. And it's got to be easy to join. I hope that was of some value. Thanks, Ross.
Lunch is kind of ready, but are there some burning questions that people want to ask in front of everybody before they can collar Chris away? One.
We have, we've got quite a good student membership, and we have a program for first year complimentary.
Yes.
And they see what we do and they like it, so they continue on. We get a bit of a problem with mid-career scientists and senior scientists. They do join and stay, they're not really engaged at all that much. But they also forget to pay, and then we've got to chase them up. But even like our regional centres are now, like the Melbourne Centre is nearly all students running the centre. We'd actually like to have more senior people involved in that too. But that's a real...
What's your organisation?
The Australian Meteorological and Oceanographic Society.
What do you think's going on with the middle age?
I think it's time, yeah. And it's such a shame because we've got all these really enthusiastic students.
The real world of a middle-aged parent? Like, when did kids used to play in the streets? We now drive them everywhere, and the time is a big factor, and yet they're really critical people. And what's often going on in their careers at that point? Like if we got them together and somehow with their time got them and asked them, what do you think are some of the key things happening for them in their profession and their career?
I suppose they'll be looking, it's really tough. The time that they have would be, a lot of them just don't have the time.
Are they suddenly in their jobs managing things that they came in to be scientists, and they're suddenly at that stage of their career now having to deal with grants and labs and students and IP, and so again, you see how I'm trying to answer it is I'm not pretending to have the answer. My answer is listen and find what is it that would really help them in at that stage of their career that we might be able to help with. It might be as simple as I'm now dealing with management stuff. Could you flick me some articles on being a manager in the world of science? And of course we can share those. They exist, and we don't have to all invent them, and we can share them. It might be that they're never going to come to a formal committee meeting, but they'd agree to be on a small little Facebook network or something, talking about dealing with with grants, or where they find a benefit in sharing the challenges they have at that stage of career. So in other words, one thing all membership organisations can do is get members learning off each other, and get the whole to be greater than the sum of the parts, as you're doing today. So I don't have any specific answers other than most organisations are finding that mid-group challenging, and yet that mid-group's critical. And so certainly in our union we've found that we put a lot of work into students and YPs, young professionals. The oldies are there for life. That middle group, we found their career is essential to them, and they're grappling with things in their career. Now that mightn't be the same for you, but we then said, well, then align our organisation. What are we doing? How have we aligned our organisations and our offerings to meet that need? Do we need to align with other groups to meet that and face up to it, that we just don't have an offering within our resource base? But if we combined with others, we could. And I think that's the radical thing I'll leave you on. If we do the honest assessment of members' needs and our organisation isn't capable of meeting them, maybe we shouldn't blame them. And rather we've got to create an organisation capable, and our organisation with limited resources, the only way it'll achieve that is with some radical options, whilst protecting the integrity of why you originally formed. I'll leave you there.